Hello everybody, Maven here, and as you all know, in the past couple weeks, Bungie released 3 massive articles going over some weapon tuning, armor tuning, ability changes, and just overall sandbox changes. The game basically got flipped entirely on its head, so after a lot of thought and consideration, I decided to make this video of the top 10 pieces of gear you're going to want to try out in the final shape. Pull them out of the vault, dust them off, and if you do not have them, get them. So let's get to the list. Hope you enjoy. Alright, editor's note, this was a lot more difficult than I thought to narrow it down to a top 10 and also put it in order. There were a boatload of honorable mentions. I'm sure some of you will mention down below in the comments. But let's just start it from the top. Number 10, the Triton Vice. Yes, you heard that right. It's here for not 1, not 2, but 4 reasons. So some of you guys might remember my Triton Vice build I did with the Unexpected Resurgence Glaive with Volt Shot, one of my most creative builds, and I'm very proud of it. But you had to be in an arc subclass because the Triton Vice wanted you to use a glaive that matched your subclass element, but that's no longer the case because of the rework. So now glaives will cause a detonation regardless of if they match your subclass element or not. And there are 6 subclasses now, so there's 6 times the potential to get creative with this build. So I'm very much looking forward to messing around with it again. And then on top of that, the Triton Vice gives you plus 100% glaive melee damage when you are surrounded, but now that effect will linger 5 seconds after not being surrounded, which really helps the ease of use. And the next change was Stylish Executioner now works with glaive melee, so when you go invis at initial time, you can chain invis forever just with glaive melees alone. And then finally, glaive projectiles got a 7% damage buff. It's small, but it helps out a bit. So with all 4 of these things combined, the Triton Vice is looking pretty juicy. Moving on to number 9, the Oversoul Edict. As you know, pulse rifles are receiving a 20% damage buff across all of PvE, but on top of that, they're receiving another 15% damage buff against red bar trash mobs. So the way that's going to multiply is that pulse rifles are going to be doing 38% more damage against trash mobs, 20% against everything else. So safe to say pulse rifles are going to be pretty meta. Now why the Oversoul Edict in particular? Well, because it has a specific perk that is also receiving a rework, and that is, believe it or not, Eddy Current. So Eddy Current was easily one of the worst perks in the entire game. You had to sprint for 3 seconds to get plus 20 reload speed. Not worth it at all. But now they have that, so now it only takes 1.5 seconds of sprinting to activate instead of 3 seconds. But on top of that, being amplified will immediately activate the perk at its maximum effectiveness. And when you are amplified, it doesn't give you plus 20 reload speed, it gives you plus 60. And on an arc subclass, you know how stupidly easy it is to be amplified 100% of the time? It's basically free. So with the Oversoul Edict, you're going to have plus 60 reload speed pretty much at all times. And the reason it's so good is because in the 4th column, you got Volt Shot, which procs by reloading. So having that bonus 60 reload speed at all times is going to make the Oversoul Edict a very nasty pulse rifle in PvE, and definitely the best one for an arc subclass. And next up in number 8, we have the Deterministic Chaos, previously one of the most trash exotics in the game, now actually going to see some play, I can assure you that. And for one simple change, they gave it intrinsic anti-barrier, and that's huge. There have been countless times where I'm doing Grandmaster Nightfalls and I'm making a loadout, and I wish I could have something in the heavy slot that can do anti-barrier, but obviously I cannot use the Lament because it's a Grandmaster. But now the Deterministic Chaos fills that role. But the reason this is lower down on the list is because the Wish Ender is still incredibly broken, so I don't know how relevant this buff is going to be. And next up at number 7, we have the Getaway Artist. One of my personal favorite exotics, didn't really see a lot of play, but now with Prismatic coming out, the Getaway Artist is going to be extremely relevant. Now, another shameless plug, I did do a recent build video on Prismatic Warlock triple turrets build with the Getaway Artist if you want to go and check it out. I'll link it in the top right corner and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. If you take a look at our Prismatic Warlock abilities here, we can have the new aspect Hellion to get that Solar Soul, but we can also have an Arc Grenade that we can consume with the Getaway Artist to create an Arc Soul and just get 2 turrets on command, and it's very consistent and it deals a lot of damage. And another thing that I didn't try out that somebody told me about in my comment section is that if you have Bleak Watcher as your other aspect and you consume your Arc Grenade to your Getaway Artist, it will also spawn a Bleak Watcher at your location. I don't know if that's true, but they said they saw footage of it. So I'm telling you right now, Getaway Artist is going to be meta. Get it ready. Now moving on to number 6, we have the Ursa Furiosa. Now this one has high capabilities of being actually number 1 on the list, but I'm not completely sure about it. So it's going to be number 6. And the reason for this is because of the nerfs to Well of Radiance and Ward of Dawn. There are a lot of changes. I'm not going to read them, but they're on the screen. They're getting some heavy hits. So when it comes to raid boss DPS, my hunch is that Ursa Furiosa Banner Shield is going to be the way to go because it grants a 40% damage buff. Correct me if I'm wrong. It could be 35%. Also grants a ton of reload speed, and it's also very spammable. Ursa Furiosa refunds a lot of energy when it ends as you block damage with it. But not only that, it's also getting a rework to work with the brand new Unbreakable ability, the one where you hold up your grenade ability and it turns it into this barricade you can walk with and block with. And when you block with that, you're also going to get super energy refunded as well. So it's going to be even more spammable than it was before. So the raid DPS meta has been Well of Radiance ever since the beginning of time, but I'm saying there's a chance we could shift towards an Ursa Furiosa meta. I'm calling it. Next up at number 5, we have the Osmiomancy gloves and the Renewal grasp. I know it's kind of cheating. This was supposed to be a top 10 video, but these two, I'm putting them together because they're both here for the same exact reason, and that is the rework to the stasis subclass that they're doing. They are adding frost armor into the game. For each stack of frost armor, you get 4.5% damage resist, and it stacks up to 5 times. And they're reworking the harvest aspects, so for Hunter and Warlock that would be Grim and Glacial, and every time you collect a stasis shard you get these stacks of frost armor. So it's safe to say you're going to have frost armor at all times, and that brings us to the change to Whisper of Torment, which is absolutely absurd. I cannot stress how absurd this is going to be. Before, when you take damage, it gave you 5% of your grenade energy back, but now they changed that to 7%. While you have frost armor, it becomes 12%, more than double of what it was before. Because previously, Whisper of Torment would actually have your grenade cooldown entirely. I tested it out. I'd have a grenade that would take a minute to recharge, but instead it took 30 seconds, like previously how it was. But now with it being 12%, because we're likely going to have that at all times with the frost armor, it's going to be like a quarter of what it normally is. It's going to be ridiculous. And the Osmiomancy and the Renewal grasp are both grenade spam builds. So having this Whisper of Torment change along with having frost armor, these builds are about to be absolutely disgusting, I'm telling you. But it doesn't even end there, because they are increasing the PvE shatter damage from 200 to 400. They're doubling shatter damage. That doesn't count stasis crystals. That's just like shattering a frozen enemy. And the Renewal grasp and the Osmiomancy both freeze things all the dang time, non-stop, constantly. So having it do double what it did before on top of those changes, it is going to be absolutely absurd. And moving on to number 4, we have the Ager Scepter. This one kind of ties into those stasis changes we just talked about, because the Ager Scepter is probably like the master at proccing the harvest perks like Grim Harvest and Glacial Harvest. It's going to make you tons of stasis shards, get you tons of frost armor very easily. And the Ager Scepter as it is already one of the strongest ad clear weapons in the entire game. But on top of what it's already going to do, they are increasing the damage of trace rifles against red bars and orange bars. So it's going to clear out that trash even more effortlessly than it already does. It's going to be absolutely overpowered when it comes to ad clear. And speaking of ad clear, moving on to number 3, we have the Colony. Now spawns additional insectoid robots on final blows, spawns up to 5 of them against tougher combatants. Now take a look at the background gameplay. When I shoot Colony at these ads, it just ends there. In the final shape, those final blows are going to spawn more little spiders to crawl around the room and attack more targets. So when you walk into a room filled with like 15 or more ads, you just lob some Colony shots out into the wild, and they're going to go find some enemies and split apart and seek even more enemies and just clear out the entire room, just chain reaction everything. You know how when you farm Onslaught right now, you got like some Xenophage users and like a Cenotaph Warlock, and you just fly in those spawn zones and Xenophage everything? Well, you're just going to use Colony instead, because you're just going to lob some shots into the spawn zones and it's just going to do all the work for you. It's going to be absolutely insane for ad clear activities where you have a Cenotaph user. It's going to be effortless. And moving on to number 2, we have the Burden of Guilt. Bet you didn't see that one coming, but I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a very meta PvE weapon that everyone's going to be using. As you know, everyone used the Riptide for a very long time because Chill Clip was broken. You shoot 2 shots and freeze a target, which was very good utility because you can technically deal with all 3 champion types with the Riptide alone, but they had to nerf that because it was too good, so now it requires 3 shots to freeze. So because it required 3 shots to freeze, it kind of made the slower firing chill clip fusions even worse and even slower. So they unnerfed that. Only the rapid fires will take 3 shots to freeze, but every other fusion archetype will only require 2 shots to freeze. And the next fastest firing chill clip fusion is the Burden of Guilt, and that's only going to take 2 shots to freeze. So that is going to replace the Riptide, and that is absolutely going to be meta for any content with champions. So check your vaults. You might already have a Burden of Guilt with chill clip. If not, you're going to have to wait until Trials comes back, but this is definitely something you're going to want to have your hands on if you are a sweaty PvE player. And number 1, Outbreak Perfected. As you know, this thing just became craftable with rewind rounds, and that rule is really making waves in PvE right now. And the 20% pulse buff with the additional 15% against trash mobs to be 38% overall has not even applied yet the Outbreak Perfected is still broken right now. And I'd like to turn your attention to the clip in the background gameplay. This comes from Ninjy, Ninjy. Go and check him out if you'd like to see weapons tested against dungeon and raid bosses. He does this kind of content daily, so go and check him out. So in this clip, he used 1 divinity with 5 rewind round Outbreak Perfecteds, and they managed to 1 phase Nezarec with the primary weapon. This is before the 20% damage buff. I just have to exaggerate that. It's gonna get even more OP. And this may compete with like heavy grenade launchers and rocket launchers, possibly. There's a chance, like it's that ridiculous. So if you do not yet have rewind rounds on your Outbreak Perfected, I recommend going after that ASAP, because the Outbreak Perfected without a doubt will be a huge part of the Final Shape PvE meta. Also, there's a champion mod for anti-barrier pulse rifles, keep that in mind. Outbreak is going to be insane. So there you have it, guys. That's my top 10, technically 11 pieces of gear you're gonna wanna try out in the Final Shape. There were a lot of honorable mentions. Like, I really wanted to fit the Ariana's Vow on this list, but I couldn't quite nudge it in. And if I missed anything incredibly significant, let me know in the comments down below. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to drop a like and a comment, because it really helps out the algorithm. And like I said before, make sure to subscribe if you are new, because the Final Shape is dropping tomorrow and we got a lot of content on the way. So I will see you in the Final Shape. Peace.